Right guys, I want to just go over a reminder of how to look at sources for Unit 2. So we're going to go through the various stages of what it is you need to do. So first thing, we're going to look at provenance. And there's several elements we need to look at. We look at the type of source, and we can see here that this is a speech. So speech from, and then the next thing we'll look at is the author. It's by Daniel Webster, a leading Northern senator. Now Webster, you should know from your own knowledge, is from Massachusetts. He's a leading figure in the North. He's seen as an anti-slavery figure, and Massachusetts is the most radical of the northern states. So therefore, him throwing his hat into the ring in favour of the compromise is a really significant moment in the debate on 1850. The speech he is making is to the Senate, so that is the audience, and this is significant because it is the Senate ultimately that will decide on whether the compromise passes or not. So to get this through the Senate is proving to be very difficult, and we've already seen Clay's failure with the omnibus, and so we're now moving towards a position where we're going to try and break the compromise down into its individual bits. The bringing of Webster in, as I've said, is going to be of considerable pull to the northern senators, and it's going to help maybe some of those who were opposed to the compromise, particularly because of the fugitive slave law, maybe bring some of them in. Now, on all of this, when you're talking about it, you're thinking about value. So Webster as a leading figure is going to be very valuable, as maybe somebody who you wouldn't automatically, or the Senate wouldn't automatically think is going to be in favour of compromise. This increases its value. The 7th of March speech is one of Webster's most famous. It is seen as a turning point in the compromise debate, because it brings in people who were up until this point opposed to the compromise and puts them in favour. So it really is a valuable source on all of that. Obviously you can look at it, this is only a particular individual viewpoint. Whether Webster has any doubts about the compromise is not going to come through, because he is arguing the purpose of this is to persuade. So he's going to put as strong an argument forward as he can, even if he had personal reservations. Those personal reservations are not going to come through. Now, the tone of the speech is quite interesting. In the first element of the speech, we can see elements where he is looking at the Senate, and in a way he's flattering it. That he's saying it is fortunate there is a Senate of the United States, a body not yet moved from its respectability, a just sense of its own dignity, its high responsibilities. Talks about it being wise, moderate, patriotic, and healing counsels. So he is praising the Senate. So that's the tone in the first paragraph, is one of praise. Always a good technique when making a speech, to praise your audience and make them feel good about themselves. The second paragraph is one that can cause some confusion for students, because it's using imagery. And what he's doing is he's using this idea of America being in the middle of a storm. So the 1850 compromise and the sectional tension at this point, he's saying it's like a storm. It billows the skies, discloses its profoundest depths. He talks about this idea of it's like a ship in a storm, not fit to hold the helm. So we've got this really powerful imagery of a ship in a storm in the second paragraph. In the first paragraph, we've got this kind of he's praising the Senate to try and get them on board. So that's tone. Again, this is very valuable. It shows us kind of the persuasive nature of it, and it really is that. As we go back to the province, that is what he's trying to do. He is trying to win the Senate over, and he does this through flattery and through the use of powerful imagery. And that again will give us a part of its value, but also possible limitations, because how trustworthy is a source with such clear tone and provenance that is aiming to persuade? Is he going to be giving you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, or is he giving you a version of the truth so he get you on board and vote for the compromise, or to get the senators on board to vote for the compromise? And the probability is the latter. Right, now if we look at the content and argument, now the first line is really interesting. He talks about that he's not coming through as a man of Massachusetts or a northern man. So he's trying to put aside sectional differences. And he's trying to remind the senators that as well as being from, as in his case, the North, or in the case of others, the South, they are Americans and members of the Senate for the United States. So he's trying to put across this idea that there is a lot that unites them as well as divides them. And this is quite a powerful argument. We've then got, as I've already mentioned with tone, we've got all this flattery of the Senate, a body not yet moved from its respectability. You could say that there's almost an implied threat in that. It says not yet moved from its respectability. And he goes on to not lost to a just sense of its own dignity and its own high responsibilities. Now, the implied kind of threat behind that would be that if the Senate doesn't manage to find a compromise, that it would lose its respectability, that it wouldn't justify have a sense of its own dignity and high responsibilities. So, yes, he's saying the Senate is all these positive things, but he's also saying, look, if we don't find a compromise, we risk those things. And he's saying, as we go on to, a body to which the country looks with confidence for wise, moderate, patriotic and healing counsels. So he's saying, look, we have the power, we have the responsibility, we are the people who can sort this out. Again, in terms of value, then you would look at this and think, well, these are strong arguments, they are persuasive arguments. Now, but whether many of the people there are going to see themselves as American first and of Massachusetts or South Carolina or Alabama or New York or anything first, it is debatable, and the division on sectional lines on the issues being voted on in the 1850 compromise, particularly in the early rounds of voting, would suggest that maybe Webster isn't speaking for everybody in the Senate. He's trying to persuade them to his point of view, and that is valuable in giving an idea of the compromise position, but it's not really giving us an insight into the position of those who are opposed to compromise. Now, please don't fall into the argument here that, oh, it's not giving a southern point of view because he is from the north. That really isn't the case with this. He isn't giving the anti-compromise position. So he's showing the responsibilities of the members of the Senate as in towards the nation as a whole. What he really isn't putting across is the argument of the responsibility of the senators and the other members of the House to represent the views of the people back home. And that is maybe something where you could talk about limitations. So those who dislike compromise, be it from the North or the South, would oppose these views, would not agree with them. And there was plenty who voted against it. The second paragraph is, again, is interesting in terms of the imagery and stuff used. He's admitting to the problem. He's not denying there's a problem. He talks about, in the first sentence, it is not to be denied that we live in the midst of strong agitation, so there is strong arguments between the North and the South. We are surrounded by very considerable dangers to our institutions and our government. Now, again, we've got an element of threat in this, where he's saying, well, look, if we don't sort this out, there could be some really damaging implications. And we've already seen, for example, at this point, the likes of Calhoun, who are threatening secession if the South isn't treated equitably, if they don't get some of the things that they want. And we really could potentially see the breakup of the USA. Now, you could argue that he's using a bit of a hyperbole here, and that really the institutions and government in America aren't really under threat at this point. There is disagreement, but remember, this is 1850, not 1860. So this idea that the institutions and government are going to collapse is maybe taking things a little bit too far. We then move on to this image of this ship. The imprisoned winds are let loose. So he's then using this imagery of everything kind of coming out, this real threat, this stormy weather for America. And he's showing the elements of the divide, the east, the north, and the stormy south. So different areas of America. Quite interesting, no mention of the west, which is the new area of America which is developing at the time. He's really trying to build the idea of the tension of this exact moment and how things need to be dealt with. He talks about the profoundest depths. In fact, this really is a big moment in history. And you can talk about, going back to your own knowledge about what's going on in the 1850 Compromise, that this is seen by many as the big moment where the problems of America could be solved, and people then looking back on it, look at it and say that these problems aren't solved. He finishes off by arguing that he is not the man to sort this out. So I do not effectively regard myself as holding or fit to hold the helm in this combat with political elements. Now, a lot of people in the North looked to Webster for leadership. Again, as it says in the attribution, one of the leading members of the Senate. And so what he's asking you to kind of interject here, well, who are the men that he's saying are fit to hold the helm and combat these political elements? And that's the bit where he's pointing to the likes of Clay and Douglas. So maybe a little limited in terms of it's not absolutely nailing that down, but he talks about this huge problem. He then seems to step himself to one side and say, but it's not for me to deal with. There is then a huge reaction in terms of this is seen as one of the key moments in getting the compromise passed, but also there's a very negative reaction against Daniel Webster in the North, in particular in what he's talking about in terms of passing the Fugitive Slave Law, which again doesn't come out in this element of the source, so something maybe to talk about in terms of limitations. Right, I hope that helps. I now want you to have a go at writing this up yourselves.